Well, hello everyone. It's Just Dwayne. Let's talk some gear. Well, hello everyone. I've had a couple of requests for some more information about the gear hammock camp seat that I made and shot a video on earlier. Basically, folks have wanted some more information on how I made it, so I thought that I'd go ahead and try to break that down on the table so that maybe you can get a better idea. Alright, so here we go. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is I'll go ahead and open it up again. Now obviously the tree straps aren't in here because those are pretty straightforward to make. If you have questions on that, just let me know. But again, what you end up with is the gear hammock, and I use Dynaglide whoopee slings, which they tell me are safe up to 200 pounds, 200 pound weight. And I'm less than 200, not by much, and they have held up fine for me. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unthread those so that we can go ahead and split this out. So again, it's just a whoopee sling. There's one out. There's two out. And you see they just go through the channels. Okay, because of the shock cord inside, it no longer will lay flat on its own. So what I've done is I've weighted it out a little bit so that we could roughly see the size of the rectangle. So I'm going to shoot a couple of measurements just so we can see. The length's looking right at about 50 inches is the finished length. Okay, and spread out widthwise, we're looking at about 38 inches is my finished width. Okay, before we talk about the edges and what I did with the shock cord and the two open loops, I kind of wanted to demonstrate how I finished the edges. And it's probably self-explanatory to a lot of you folks. A lot of folks kind of know how to sew, but I was not one of those people, so I had to figure out some of this stuff myself from different videos and such. So to make it easier, I'm using a piece of paper. And what I'll do first with my material is I'll fold it over one time to get the rough edge of the fabric inside, and then I'll run a stitch along that fold. And what that does is gives me a good secure fold to finish off my hem, and I don't have to try to hold it and fold and fold. Some people can actually just fold the fabric over and then fold to the finished hem length and run a stitch, and that works out well for them. However, when I try to do that, I end up losing this piece of fabric, and I end up with this really erratic looking fold, and it doesn't ever work out well. So what I do is again, just I stitch mine one time so that that's secured, and then I go to whichever distance, once that's already done, whatever distance I'm going to do, fold it again, and then I'll run my stitch along here. Now on this one, once I had the stitch run and I had that channel made, I went ahead and ran a second set of stitching just to give it reinforced strength. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is the two edges. What I did on the edges was simply what I showed you with the piece of paper. I folded it once, sewed that, folded it again, and sewed it again. You'll see that there's two lines on this side, and that's because one is for that first fold, one is for the second. Okay, now looking at the edge again, folded over twice, I end up with about a 1/2 inch channel there. And what that is, it's just big enough to take that 1/16 shock cord and run it all the way around the perimeter of the camp chair / gear hammock. And that allows it to tighten up both as a gear hammock and as a pack cover. So a 1/2 inch with that 16th shock cord, it was no problem at all to thread that through there. Okay, here we're looking at the foot end. The foot end has a 3.5 inch channel all the way along the bottom, and that makes it wide enough to take a reasonably sized stick and push it through that channel so that it can be used as a wilderness chair. Again, I folded it over once and then double stitched this side for extra strength. Again, you're seeing 3, one's for that first fold and then 2 additional ones for the reinforcement, and that seems to work just fine. Okay, one important note on the order in which I did this. I did the side channels first, sewed them on first, and then did the end channels. And the reason I did that was, as you can see, by doing the side channels first, I end up with a more reinforced opening on this big tube that can take the stick. I figured that way it was as reinforced as I could make it without adding additional fabric. Okay, the head end is sewed exactly the same as the foot end, with this exception that it's 3/4 of an inch instead of 3.5 inches. Whether you're using it as a wilderness chair or as a gear hammock, you only have to thread a line through there to secure the top of it, so it didn't need to be as wide as the foot end did. Okay, finally I wanted the storage sack to be part of the gear hammock to save some weight and so that it couldn't be lost. To do that, I ended up with the finished piece 6.5 inches long and 4.5 inches wide. Again, I sewed a small fold all along the edge so that I wouldn't end up with the finished edge. An important thing to remember though is that I have the fold on the outside of the gear hammock, because whenever I use it as a stuff sack, this whole piece is going to flip inside out, so I wanted the finished side to be inside this little bag. But you see, because I'm using the hammock itself, I saved the weight of the back side. Okay, and to finish it up, I wanted a drawstring top. I started off with Velcro and that didn't work very well, so what I used is some 80-pound polyester line, very light, and just created a channel at the top that I could cinch up once it was turned inside out. Now, as I said in my earlier video, one of the ways that I've tried to hang my gear hammock is running it next to my main hammock, and that works pretty well, except that the two hammocks want to come together. The weight brings them down, bouncing into each other. So the way I resolved that was I sewed a small Grosgain tab. So we have a small tab there, and so you can see the stitching a little bit better. We'll look at the other side. Basically, I just sewed around, a square around the outside, did a little crisscross in the middle. And what that lets me do is hook a piece of cordage to this tab and stake it out. And what that does is my main hammock's here, and it just lets this one pull off to the side, almost like a side shelf. And that works pretty well as long as I don't try to put all my weight in there. If I just have a couple of items, it works fine. If I try to put too much weight in there, though, then it really wants to fight that. It's got to be well staked. So sometimes though, I can find a tree over there and I can tie it off nice and tight. Then it doesn't really matter about the weight there. Okay, the last thing I wanted to do was show you some of the different cordage that I use so that you get an idea of the relative sizes. Maybe get an idea for it, because I know I didn't really have an idea on what all this cordage looked like before I tried. So the first thing I'm showing you is this is 7/64 AM steel. This is the stuff most whoopee slings are made out of. Okay, so I'll use that as for comparison purposes, because a lot of folks have that. Now the next thing I'm going to set next to it is the Dyneema whoopee slings. Okay, I'm trying to get it there where we can see it. Okay, so you can see much thinner, good bit lighter, but not nearly as strong. But for this particular purpose, it works well. Okay, keeping that up. This is the standard 1/8 inch shock cord. Okay, so you can see it's about as thick as almost as thick as a whoopee. And in fact, it's probably a little bit thicker than a whoopee, and it's got a lot of tension to it. Okay, and this is a lot of the shock cord that generally I find comes with a lot of equipment. It's very strong, very elastic, but also overkill for a lot of purposes and heavier than it needs to be. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the AmStill. The next piece of shock cord that I'll have to show is 3/32. Okay, so this is 1/8 inch, which is 4 30-seconds. This is 3 30-seconds. Okay, so you can see more stretch but lighter weight. So if you don't need as much pull, it works fine. And I generally use this thinner line on the corners of my Cuban fiber tarp for the doors. Since there doesn't seem to be a lot of stress on those, that's held up fine so far. We'll see if any gales come up. And then finally, there's the 1/16 inch shock cord, which is 2 30-seconds, right? So we have 4 3 and 2 30-seconds. This is the smallest shock cord I've been able to find. It's extremely flexible, but it's really, really light. In fact, it comes on a spool. Like, this is how I got it. And you can see it's like 50 feet in that really small, very light package. So this is what I used to run in the channels all the way around the gear hammock, so that I could cinch it tight, both to hold the equipment as a gear hammock and to use it as a pack cover. So I got almost no weight, and it gives me just enough springiness to do the job. Okay, well, that's our quick look at the materials I used and the techniques that I used to build my gear hammock slash camp seat slash pack cover slash whatever. Hopefully you find it helpful. I know whenever I was trying to figure out a new piece of gear, it's nice to be able to see a video that maybe shows some close-ups so you can put it together in your mind, and hopefully that was helpful to some. I gotta tell you, I appreciate all the subscriptions I've gotten. I appreciate all the comments, the nice comments that I've gotten. And if you have any further questions, please let me know. Thanks again for subscribing. Hopefully this is helpful to someone, and I look forward to seeing you again on the trail.